Hello everybody and welcome back to the School of Hard Knocks. My name is Equinox, previously of the guild Everything Purple and briefly Salt Miners Union, and today we'll be talking about the Guardian class. Just be glad it's not my footage, because I am a trash Guardian. So welcome back once again to the third episode of GvG Profession Playbook. As I mentioned in the intro, today's episode is about Guardians. My footage today comes from a Guardian from the guild Good Clean Fun. It was given to me by Luxslayer on the forums. So thank you very much for that submission. Before we get into the video, so I don't have to repeat myself, something I want everyone watching to focus on is something I'm going to point out throughout the video, which is a lack of independent thinking. And this has definitely been an issue with pretty much all the footage I've received so far. Either you have Necromancers waiting on callouts from the driver, or you have Guardians that are using their skills exactly as the driver is, and instead of thinking for themselves, they're just following instructions and following a target, or focusing their camera onto their driver instead of the enemy, and not being able to react to them. And this is an issue that I think a lot of mid and low tier guilds suffer from, as they focus more on group cohesion and forget about the impact that a skilled individual can have on a GvG. But without any further delays, let's just get straight into the footage here. So the first instance of a lack of independent thinking is right here on the first push. The driver calls for lines, which he shouldn't when they're so far away from their veil and they've already stealthed. But the player shouldn't have dropped lines when it was called for. It was a waste of a 40-second cooldown, and they can easily maneuver around it and push back in on them, as they do here when they push in on the gank. The next error I see here is when the enemy starts to push on them, and instead of dropping a symbol of wrath to start regenning when the enemy starts pushing in, and then dodging when he needs to, he just dodges, swaps his staff and dodges again, and he doesn't actually avoid any damage, so he basically wastes his dodge roll. Then they push in, he's melee staff cleaving, which is not good. There's no reason to be that close in staff because it doesn't boost your damage whatsoever to be closer. They leap in, and he spins, and this is something I want to point out, because this is what is bad positioning, melee positioning for a Guardian. So I'll show you here what I'm talking about with good melee positioning for Guardians. If you're going to be using Greatsword, this also applies to Hammer, but let's specifically talk about Greatsword since it's definitely the more popular weapon, offensive weapon, because it's definitely the more popular offensive weapon among Guardians for the mobility. If you are going to use Greatsword, you can't just run up here. You know, they have 10 melee here, let's pretend this is their melee stack, and you push in with your 10 melee, and you decide to all spin right in the middle of their clump because you want to hit 5 targets, you want to feel all badass and esportsy. And I'll give you that much, it is extremely satisfying to hit 5 people with your spin, but you also have to realize that this isn't very good for 2 reasons. One, you're spreading your damage out throughout the entire enemy front line when you hit 5 people, because your Guardians are going to leap, they're going to leap over here, they're going to leap over there, and they're going to spin, and they're going to only hit, a few times, and maybe you have like a Venn diagram right here where one Guardian spins on this side, and another Guardian spins on the other side, and the only 2 targets that are getting hit by the 2 of them are ones right here in the middle of you 2. But overall, it spreads out your damage needlessly. What you should rather do instead is hit the side and focus on 2 targets, also known as peeling the onion. I believe that's Sacrix's phrase. And not only will you be concentrating your frontline damage onto 2 or 3 targets, because against a good guild, what can you honestly expect other than getting about 1 to 2 downs on a push? That's all you really need, that's all you really want. That's all you're looking for to punish when you push into a group, especially a good guild. It's just 1 or 2 downs that you can punish. Another reason why this is good is because when you're doing a spin in the middle of their stack, you are hitting yourself for so much retaliation damage, which their frontline should have. Whether it's from Stand Your Ground or Symbol of Wrath, they're going to have retal from somewhere. And if you spin on them, your Whirling Wrath, you can sort of ignore this tooltip. What actually happens is you hit 6 times with your Greatsword spin, you throw out 7 projectiles, and of course also you'll probably be proccing with your Sigil of Fire on your Greatsword to deal additional hits, which comes out to a total of 30 for the spin, 7 for the impacts, and then 5 for the fire blast. So you'd be dealing 42 hits of retail damage to yourself by spinning on 5 people. And retail is usually about, I think, 240, so that totals out to be 10,080 damage you're putting onto yourself. And that's, for Guardians, generally you run about 19k health at maximum. So that's more than half of your health you're taking out of there just because you want to spin on 5 people. So spinning on 2 to 3 people cuts down the ticks of retail by anywhere from 12 to 18. So you'd be taking 30 hits of retail, or even 24 hits of retail instead, which is much, much better. So that's what you should consider if you're going to be playing on Greatsword Guardian, where you should focus your damage. Try and focus it on one side. So if you're pushing in from over here and you leap in, try and just aim at the left side. If your driver's not communicating it, just pick a side and fucking pray. Another thing you should consider doing when you do this is dropping your symbol before spinning. Not only is this more damage, and not only does it give you retail, but also when your melee pushes in on this spot that you just leaped on and dropped your symbol, the retail procs onto your front line will be regenning you because of altruistic healing. So this is another way you could try to mitigate that incoming damage from outside sources, and also from just the retail damage that you would naturally take. So do try to keep that in mind if you are a Guardian in GvGs. So they're going towards the gank fight to meet the enemy melee, and this is actually a good opportunity for me to talk about a trick I call line placement manipulation. Okay, so what am I talking about when I talk about line placement manipulation? First of all, this is a pretty simple trick. It was introduced to me back in 2013 by Malbrak, the leader of Kushwatz Haderach, KH, and despite it being a pretty simple trick, it's not one that I think many people are aware of. So to get an idea for how lines work, let's first take a look at the indicator when you're going to cast a line. So this is actually very deceiving, the indicator on the ground that you see here. Lines aren't actually placed like this unless you're standing still. And the reason behind this is because when you're standing still, your character moves in the direction. Let me give you an example with another skill so I don't use the cooldown. Whenever you go to place any ability, when you're standing still, your character turns to face where you're placing it, like this. As you can see on the minimap, my reticle turns because my character turned, and that is the direction my character is facing. Now, if I'm going to cast a line, what this does is that, as you can see here, it's going to go straight up and down if I cast it from here. And it does. The reason behind this is because line placement is ultimately determined by the direction you're facing and not where the line is relative to you. And I think that's why this trick eludes a lot of people, is because when you just use the indicator, you would normally get the impression that line placement is determined by where your character is positioned relative to where the line is going. So imagine a line, just imagine an imaginary line between your character and the center of this line here, and you might think, oh, well, that's what determines how the line is placed, but that's not actually true. And I'll show it to you here. This is probably the most common example of when using line manipulation is very important. So let's say that this group of golems right here is the enemy melee stack, or just the enemy stack in general. There's just a bunch of guys trying to run from point A over here to point B over at this indestructible golem. That might be a gank fight or a down state or whatever. The point is that they're trying to get from here to here, from over here to over here, and you want to stop them with a line. Now, the problem with this is, as you can see with the indicator, the line is going to go straight across from left to right. And that's not really going to catch many people. And certainly it's not going to strip many stab stacks, which is very important with the new stability changes. So, as I mentioned before, direction determines how the line is placed. It's perpendicular to your character, where your character is facing. So the reason why that line was placed from left to right is because I was facing, in this case it'd be the west. So the line was positioned in a north to south direction. So if I wanted to get it in a west to east direction across this entire group, I would need to turn my camera to face either north or south, and that would determine how the line is played. So I'll show you how it's done exactly right here. So just place the line. It doesn't matter where you're facing when you place the line. Just place it and then turn your camera, and then once the cast time is done, there you have it. That's what determines how the line is played. So when this group is trying to run from point A over here to point B, they're all going to have to run through this line, or they're going to have to maneuver around it, which can also be an effective way of picking off targets on the backside very easily and spreading them out a little bit more. So if this Guardian here used that trick and placed this line right here where the commander right there leaps, all of their melees, they push it on those 2 downs, would theoretically have to run into it at least once, if not twice, when they disengage, if it's a good enough line, or if they commit far enough. And that would either strip 2 stab stacks on multiple targets, or you'd catch a lot of front line and be able to punish those front line and generate downs that way. Now the next weak point of this gameplay is right here on the engagement, or lack thereof, because he leaps in the wrong direction, and he shouldn't be leaping when his stability is almost off cooldown. He should be communicating that constantly to the driver, saying my stability is coming up in 2 seconds. And then he should say, and then the driver would then know, okay, let's wait until that stability is available and then push in, because it's, it's very, very important, especially when you are in the driver's party. You have to communicate your stability cooldowns with the driver. You have to communicate all vital cooldowns with the driver, because they need as much information as possible at their disposal to make all the decisions that they make in the GvG. But then coming up on this push, the driver actually communicates, spins on the right, so that's good, and he focuses his spins on the right, hitting, a few targets here, so this is good. This is good positioning for that spin. He drops the only problem I can say about that is that he didn't drop his symbol first. He decided to drop it second, and it would have been more beneficial for him to drop his symbol first for the region, but the enemy was on the back foot, so it didn't really matter as much in this case. Another good point, he drops his symbol there on the down, using that offensively. Earlier he didn't use that symbol of swiftness often enough, in my opinion, in an offensive situation, but here he actually does, so that was good. And it's especially good that he does this right before the empower, because there's a way that he can still deal damage while empowering, and therefore multitask, so that was actually also a good thing that he did. Kicking off the next round, they get caught out earlier. The stability was late. Should be using that courage pop at 1200 range of the enemy, so that moments like that don't happen. He wastes the purging flame when him and his group don't have a lot of conditions. And here's another example of a lack of independent thinking. Tunnel visioning the driver with his camera instead of just following the driver and then looking behind. You can either bind a look behind key or just move your camera with the left click on the mouse, whatever works for you, but you should constantly be aware of where the enemy is positioned at. So now they push in on them, and he still keeps his camera off until now, and he's trying to throw down, as he should, a symbol, a swiftness to region, and deal some counter damage. Another thing that he could have been doing here is using his Orb of Wrath on the staff. That's something that you should definitely always do, either if you're being pushed on, because if you're going to use it offensively, it is a lot of damage, but even if you use it defensively, it's like a 1k AoE heal if you just double tap it really quick, and that's something that every Guardian should have a habit of doing. And also, if you feel like you're going to swap up a staff anytime in the near future, you should definitely just use that Orb of Wrath really quickly, because there's literally no reason not to. If somebody around you needs a heal, then they'll get it, and if not, then no harm, no foul, because I think it's like a 12-second cooldown, which means it'll be available the next time you swap back to your staff to empower. And now up ahead, when they jump onto this group right here, when they're chasing the tail, someone gets a really, really good ring here, but he doesn't drop his symbol of wrath again. So you can see he only had 14k health, so he definitely could have used that altruistic healing procs from the symbol of wrath to help heal him up. Okay, so continuing on the round, he swaps the staff, pushes in, misses an opportunity to drop a good line. He tries to use the offensive symbol of swiftness, but doesn't manage to actually land it. So he empowers here and immediately uses Virtue of Justice, which is not good because it overwrites the stability stacks from Empower with a shorter duration version. He pushes in on the enemy gank after they've downed a Necro. He doesn't leash and try to pull them, since obviously they wouldn't have stability, so that's something he could definitely do better. So he wastes his heal because he runs into a static. then just panic pops his stability there, which was wasted because the enemy had already fully disengaged. Okay, so this is definitely a big issue. So right here you see like literally four purgings go down from Fun's side. You should not waste a purging on a few condies that pop up on your bar, because you don't even know how long those are going to last, since you should have Holbrack runes and minus condi duration food. That it's not going to be very impactful. So they really need to be way more calm and relaxed about when they use their purgings, because you can't afford to blow 4 purgings all at the same time. That's just such a waste of cooldowns. So when he goes in, obviously he doesn't use Symbol of Wrath before Whirling Wrath, but another thing he fails to do is, 1, he uses his Stand Your Ground in a bad position again, which is not efficient with the cooldown. And also you can see throughout most of this video, his Virtue of Resolve is completely unused. He also stands in wells up here, which was just, I don't even know. I guess he just completely zoned out, because there's no reason you should just stand on top of wells and let it convert your boons into conditions. There's utterly no reason for that to ever happen. But back to the Virtue of Resolve, there were definitely so many opportunities where he could be using that burst heal on his resolve to be healing either Kyle, since Kyle's running around roaming and taking a lot of damage, or either of the other two in his group. Overall, I'd say his playstyle definitely does seem very selfish, in that he doesn't pay attention to his party much. He only reacts to his own. He only reacts to when he's being caught in crowd control and when he's getting conditions put on himself. He doesn't really pay attention to his group and what they're doing. Alright, so he pushes up ahead. He gets caught in a static, which is fine. He really should be dropping damage onto this down state when he can. And he should have dropped a line on that down state and some damage as well before leaping in. He throws out the Binding Blade, but it's basically a waste. If anything, he should have saved it for the gankers. The gank have a massive presence in this round. It's really hard to ignore them. He should be mindful of saving that Binding Blade for the gankers. So when they're pushing in on the gankers here, and they regroup and start to roll off, the enemy front line is pushing on them hard. So he really needs to keep his camera, which he's failing to do, on the enemy front line and watching them, because he can easily prepare for this next push they have. He wouldn't have had enough time to pop stability since it was still on a couple second cooldown, but he could have renewed focus or sheltered in order to mitigate a lot of that damage. He comes out okay at the end of it, but still something he could have done better. But he finally drops the Symbol of Wrath on a down state, which is great. He does use Virtue of Resolve here, but I think it was mostly just because he was using Renew Focus anyway, because he was losing health and not because he felt like his party was losing health. I don't know if it's something that Fun tells their Guardians to do with their Virtue of Resolve to keep the passive regeneration, but it's definitely not something I recommend anyone else to do. You should absolutely be using the active on Virtue of Resolve to help other people in your group. Alright, now I want you all to pay very close attention to what I'm about to point out to you. This is all a bunch of whatever stuff. He uses the staff and backs off. But right here, I want you to pay attention. Right up ahead, he does the worst thing you can do on a Guardian. He drops a symbol on the fucking regroup. Never do that! Thank you. I'm kidding, of course, although not completely kidding. Fun might have actually had all their staff allies killed by IX's gank at this point, so nobody actually could drop a water field. But I still wanted to make a point of it, because it is literally the worst thing you can do on a Guardian is to drop a symbol on the regroup. And it's everyone, it happens to everyone like once or twice, but your commanders should yell at you and you should feel awful, and then you should never ever do it again. But I really wanted to point that out, because it is such an important thing to bring up, because nobody wants to blast retail on a regroup. Your warriors do not want to blast retail on a regroup. So meanwhile, while I'm talking about that, he's actually doing a really good job of putting out pressure and surviving. When they're outnumbered, he's putting down good symbol drops, good pressure on the downs, and so he runs in, he leashes, he pulls immediately, which is bad, because Binding Blade actually has a damage over time effect that scales off your condition damage, which you should have a decent amount of from might stacks alone. And so you can get some of that extra damage off before you pull. I mean, the leash lasts 10 seconds as long as you're staying within 600 range. You can outlast the duration of stand your ground with your leash if you're patient. So it's generally not worth pulling on the leash unless you're going to all do it at the same time and quickly rip all their stab stacks away from them and pull them into you, and then subsequently drop a ring of warding afterwards. That is when it would be worth it to pull immediately, but otherwise you should probably try and get some of that extra damage off instead. And now the round goes on, he's doing fine here, he just renewed focused. And immediately popped his Virtue of Justice, probably not necessary, but now he empowers and drops a line behind. It's good that he canceled that empower because they were right on his heels. Drops a line and symbol behind to counterpunch, hopefully catch some people and string them out. He really needs to pop his shelter here sooner to avoid this damage. There it is. You can see he also pops the Virtue of Justice for a little bit of sustain there. And he should really be trying to double tap that Orb of Light to get a good heal onto himself before he drops that symbol down. And our hero finally goes down, which is the end of the round. So he didn't do terrible that round. He survived until the very end. I mean, he was one of the last people left up. And I would like to give him some credit, some backhanded credit about his shelter and renewed focus. He didn't really have to use them almost at all for the entire GvG up until the last 1 or 2 minutes when Fun had almost nobody left. Now, I think there are 2 reasons behind this. One, he is extremely efficient with his positioning and with his sustain, but also I think it comes from the fact that he favors the staff, and you rarely see him using his greatsword to great effect. I think he's very reserved, and I think he's very selfish, and I think that helps him survive. But I think his contribution could be much, 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 much greater if he would polish up some of those mechanics, gain more party awareness, so that he can support them with Virtue of Resolve, as I said before. I think he definitely needs to save his Virtue of Justice for the right situation. One thing I didn't point out in a particular spot in this video, Virtue of Justice is 3 stacks of might to yourself and 4 other people, which makes it 15 stacks of a boon that is given, which means that your AH procs 15 times on just Virtue of Might. So even though it is a very short might duration, you have to also consider that it is a pretty decent self-heal. And that is what, in my opinion, Virtue of Justice is best for, which actually works pretty well because when you need the self-sustain in the middle of a pocket fight, and you also need to reapply might stacks since they'll eventually start to fall off from your empower, Virtue of Justice is there to give you a few to keep you up. But it's definitely something you shouldn't use right after your empower, as I mentioned earlier in the video. I can't say in good conscience that he is a great player, but he did pretty well to survive. But I do like the fact, I know his style was very defensive, and I'd like to see him be a lot more aggressive and apply a lot more pressure and improve a lot of his mechanics. The fact that he knows his limitations and doesn't use shelter and renewed focus needlessly tells me that he definitely has a brain. So I'd like to see him put it to better use and make some really smart plays. No offense. But again, thanks for your footage and good luck in the future. I hope this was helpful to you and everyone else out there. I'll try to add more of these little clips in between of me showcasing some of the abilities and how to use them, and hopefully that helps even more than just watching other people's footage. So thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next video, which will be 2 weeks from now. I'm not going to be uploading on a weekly basis. I will be uploading on a bi-weekly basis because I just don't have as much time to work on these videos as before, and stretching them out over a longer period of time, if I remember to do them before the last 3 days, help me in the revision process. Anyway, Au revoir. See you next time.